No, I never told my son what was buried under the floorboards of the cabin in northern Maine. Not in 32 years. Not when his mother was alive. Not after she passed. Not even when he turned 40, and I figured he was old enough to be trusted with the weight of it. Some things you carry alone because that's the deal you made. And you don't break the deal just because your shoulders get tired. I was up at my brother Hollis's place outside Bangor when the phone rang. We were sitting on his back porch with a couple of beers, watching the light go down over the pines, and I'd just gotten to the part of the story where our father had taught us both how to gut a deer when I was 11 and he was 9. Hollis was laughing the way he does, all in his chest. And then my phone buzzed against the wood of the chair arm, and I saw my son's name, and something in my gut went cold before I even picked up. Dad. That one word. The way he said it. I've been a father for 41 years, and you learn the language of your kid's voice the way you learn the language of weather. This was a storm voice. What is it, son? You need to call somebody. The sheriff. I don't know. She's at the cabin. She's at the cabin right now, and she's got the door open, and I don't know what to do. I set the beer down. Hollis stopped laughing. Slow down. Who's at the cabin? My wife. Dad, she's there. She drove up there. She's got the truck, and she said she's not coming back until she finds it. Finds what? There was a silence on the line. The kind where you can hear a person breathing through their nose because they've forgotten how to breathe through their mouth. She thinks there's money. She thinks you've been hiding money from us. From me. She kept saying it tonight, over and over. That you've been lying to me my whole life, and that it's hers too because she's family now. I closed my eyes. I could see the cabin in my head clear, as if I were standing in front of it, the sagging porch my father and I rebuilt the summer before he died. The black iron stove. The trapdoor under the rag rug in the bedroom that nobody had lifted since Reagan was president. How does she know about the cabin, son? I told her. Months ago. I'm sorry. I told her you'd taken me up there as a kid, and she kept asking, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't know there was anything to know. Is she alone? No. Her brother's with her. He's the one driving. They left maybe 2 hours ago, and she just called me from the road, told me what they were doing, and I tried to talk her out of it, and she hung up on me. 2 hours. From the city, it was a 4-hour drive. They'd be there by midnight if they pushed it. Listen to me, I said. I want you to stay where you are. Don't get in your car. Don't drive after her. You hear me? Dad, she's my wife. I hear you. And I'm telling you to sit tight. I'll handle this. I hung up, and Hollis was looking at me with that face he gets, the one where he's already 3 steps ahead and doesn't like where the math is leading. What's at the cabin, brother? I told him. I hadn't told anyone in my life except his mother, my late wife, who knew because she'd been there when we put it down there, and now I was telling him, because I needed somebody to know in case this went wrong. I told him what was under the floorboards, and what was in the safe deposit box in the bank in Portland, and what my wife had set up before she got sick, before she knew she was sick, because she had a kind of sense about people that I never quite developed to myself. She'd looked at our future daughter-in-law one Thanksgiving and said to me later that night, in our bedroom with the door closed, "That girl is going to try to take something from him one day, and I'm going to make sure when she does, she walks away with nothing." 3 months later, she was diagnosed. 18 months after that, I buried her on a Tuesday in October, and in between those 2 dates, she did exactly what she said she'd do, with the kind of methodical patience I have only ever seen in her. She called a lawyer. She set up the trust. She wrote the letters. She took our son aside one Saturday afternoon when his future wife wasn't there, and she made him sit down at the kitchen table, and she said certain things to him, in her voice that had gone thin from the chemo, and he cried and signed what she put in front of him. He didn't tell his fiancée. His mother had asked him not to, and to his credit, that one promise he kept. Hollis listened to all of this without saying a word. When I was done, he stood up, drained his beer, and said, "I'll get the truck." You're not coming with me. The hell I'm not. Hollis, I need you to make a call for me. To Eddie. Eddie is my wife's cousin. He's been the property manager for the cabin and the surrounding 20 acres for as long as we've owned it. He lives 12 minutes away from there, and a double wide on a piece of land his father left him, and he keeps a key to the gate at the bottom of the access road. He also keeps something else, which I'm not going to specify, but which my wife had insisted he keep, back when she was making her arrangements. Tell Eddie what's happening. Tell him not to engage. Tell him to drive up to the gate and lock it from the inside and wait for me. And tell him to call the sheriff out of Aroostook County. He knows who to ask for. Hollis nodded slowly. And you? I'm driving up there. It's 3 hours. Then I'd better start. I drove with the windows down because I needed the cold air on my face to keep my hands from shaking, not from fear. I want to be clear about that. I was not afraid of the woman my son had married. I was angry. In a way, I hadn't been angry in a very long time. And the anger needed somewhere to go, and I did not want it to go through the steering wheel. I thought about her on the drive, my daughter-in-law. I'd known her for almost 6 years. She'd come into my son's life the year before his mother got sick. And I want to say this honestly. I tried to like her. I really tried. The first dinner we had, my wife made a roast and I made small talk about her work. And she answered all the questions politely and laughed at the right places and asked me about my service, and I thought, well, she's making an effort. That's something. But there were things. There were always things. The way she looked at the house when she didn't think anybody was watching her, like she was appraising it. The way she asked, very early on, what my son's salary was, framing it as concern about whether they could afford a place together. The way she steered every conversation about the future toward what we had and what would happen to it. Not crudely, she wasn't stupid, but persistently. Like water finding cracks in a foundation. My wife saw it before I did. Women see other women in a way men generally don't. By the time I started to suspect, my wife had already known for a year and was already planning. The wedding was the size of a small city. I'm not exaggerating. They had a guest list of 380 people, most of whom my son had never met, and they did it at a resort on the coast that cost more per night than my first car cost new. I'm not even going to say how much the whole thing came to. My son paid for half of it himself, with money he didn't really have, and I paid for a quarter as a gift. And her parents, who, I should mention, had been divorced for 15 years and barely spoke to each other, covered the last quarter only after a series of phone calls I was not privy to, but which I gathered did not go well. She wore a dress that her mother told me, with some pride, had cost more than my truck. The flowers alone were $22,000. There was a string quartet for the ceremony and a 10-piece band for the reception, and a separate DJ for the after-party, and a vintage car to drive them away and that they didn't even own, just rented for 40 minutes for the photographs. I stood in the receiving line and I shook 380 hands, and I smiled until my face hurt, and I thought about my wife, who had been gone 4 years by then. And I thought about what she had said to me that night in our bedroom. And I thought, well, she's going to try. And she's going to find that the door she's pushing on doesn't open. 3 years into the marriage, they bought a house. Or rather, my son bought a house. Because she had insisted very early in their relationship that her credit was complicated and that all major purchases should be in his name. The house was in a neighborhood she had picked, and a price range that made my son sweat when he told me about it, and she furnished it with the kind of furniture you can't sit on without feeling like you're going to break it. She did not work, by the way. She had a degree in something called brand strategy, and she had a social media presence, and she called herself an entrepreneur, and she made, to the best of my understanding, no actual money. My son worked 60 hours a week as a structural engineer and paid for everything. A year after that, they bought a car. A second car. She didn't need it because she rarely drove anywhere. They had a driver service for most of her appointments, which she also didn't pay for, but she wanted it. And what she wanted, she got. It was a German SUV that cost more than my late father had earned in 5 years of working at the paper mill. The monthly payment was over $1,500. I know because my son told me one night when he'd had 3 glasses of wine and his guard was down. He'd looked at me across the kitchen island in his 2-big house, and he'd said, very quietly, "Dad, I don't know how I'm going to keep this up." And I said, "Because I am his father and I love him. You don't have to." And he said, "I do, though. I love her." And I let it go. Because that's what fathers do. Sometimes, when their grown sons make decisions the fathers cannot save them from. You sit there and you nod and you let it go, and you trust that when the time comes, the things you put in place will hold. The cabin is not a cabin anymore, not really. It was a cabin when my father bought the land in 1962 with money he'd saved from 20 years of overtime at the mill. It was a cabin when he built it, with his own hands over the course of 3 summers, helped by me and Hollis and our uncle and a guy named Pop who lived down the road and never quite explained what his real name was. It was a cabin when I inherited it in 1989, but over the years my wife and I had added to it. Careful additions, a back room, a screened porch, a finished basement that we used as a guest room when the kids were in college. By the time my wife passed, it was something more like a small house, set back in the woods at the end of a half-mile dirt road that you couldn't find on any map I'd ever seen. What was under the floorboards in the bedroom was not money. I want to make that clear, although it took me a long time to make it clear to myself. What was there was primarily paper, a box of paper. Specifically, my father's letters home from Korea, in a tin he had kept under his own bed until he died. My mother's diaries, 6 of them, leather-bound, which she had asked me to keep but never read, and which I have honored that request on for 41 years. My wife's wedding ring, which she had taken off the day before she went into hospice because her fingers had gotten too thin and she didn't want it to slip off in the bed. My son's first tooth. His first lock of hair, the original deed to the land, on parchment, signed by my father in pencil, because that was the only thing he had to write with that day. A photograph of my parents on their wedding day, the only one that exists. A photograph of my wife, at 22, that I have never shown anyone, taken the night I asked her to marry me. There was also, yes, a small amount of cash. About $4,000 in old bills my father had hidden there, during a period in the 70s when he didn't trust banks. I had never spent it because it wasn't really money to me by that point. It was just something he had touched. And there were, I will admit, 2 other items, which I am also not going to specify. They were not valuable in any meaningful financial sense, but they were the kind of things you do not want strangers to find. That was what was under the floorboards. That was the treasure my daughter-in-law was driving 4 hours through the night to dig up. She thought it was money. She had built up, in her own head over the years, this elaborate fantasy in which I, a retired electrical contractor on a fixed income, was secretly sitting on some hidden fortune that I was withholding from my son out of spite or paranoia or some other quality she had projected onto me. I think part of it was that she could not understand why I lived the way I did. I drove a 15-year-old truck. I shopped at the same grocery store I'd shopped at for 40 years. I cut my own hair. I did not understand, in her view, the proper relationship between money and life, which was that the first existed to display the second. She had asked me about the cabin, once, at a Christmas dinner. Asked me what was up there. Asked me, specifically, if there was a safe. I'd looked at her over the top of my glass and I had said, "There's a wood stove. There's a fishing rod. There's some old books." And she'd smiled the smile I had come to recognize and she'd said, "But surely there's something else. Some old man like you, way out in the woods. There's always something." I'd laughed it off at the time. My wife, sitting next to me, had not laughed. I drove. The miles fell away. I called Eddie from the road and he picked up on the second ring and said yes. Hollis had reached him and, yes, he was on his way to the gate. And yes, the sheriff's deputy was going to meet him there. He sounded, to my ear, almost cheerful about it. Eddie has not had what I would call an exciting life, and I think a small part of him had been waiting, for some years, for someone to give him a reason to use the things he kept in the cabinet over his refrigerator. I called my son back. He picked up, And he was crying, which broke my heart, but did not surprise me. I told him the plan. I told him to stay home. I told him I would call him when it was done. He asked me, in a small voice, what was going to happen, and I said, nothing she's going to like, but nothing that's going to put her in the hospital. I just want her to understand what she's walked into. Dad, he said. Dad, did Mom? Yes. How long ago? She started 6 months before she got sick. She finished the legal side of it about a month before she went into hospice. She knew, son. She knew this was going to happen. He cried harder. I let him. After a minute, he said, why didn't she tell me? She told you what she needed to tell you. The rest, she didn't want you carrying. And you've been carrying it. All this time. That's my job, son. That's what fathers do. I got to the gate at 11:20. Eddie's truck was parked across it sideways, blocking it, and there was a sheriff's vehicle behind him. And standing next to the sheriff's vehicle was a deputy I knew slightly from a hunting trip 10 years ago, a tall man with a gray mustache, who lifted his hand in greeting as I pulled up. Evening, he said. Evening, deputy. Eddie's been filling me in. You want to tell me your version? I told him. I kept it short. I gave him the names. I told him my daughter-in-law had not, technically, broken any law yet, because she had not yet entered the property. The cabin was a quarter-mile up the road from the gate. They had not arrived. We were ahead of them. The deputy nodded. He looked at his watch. He said, well, let's see what they do when they get here. We waited. Eddie offered me coffee from a thermos, and I took it. The night was cold for early September, and there was the smell of wood smoke from somewhere far off. I thought about my wife. I thought about her thin hand on mine in the hospice bed when she had said to me, the last clear thing she ever said, don't let her win. Headlights came up the road at 12 minutes after midnight. A black SUV, the kind my son had paid for. It slowed when it saw the gate and the lights and the deputy. It stopped about 50 feet away. Nobody got out for a long moment. Then the passenger door opened, and my daughter-in-law stepped out. She was dressed for what she imagined this trip to be. Hiking boots, brand new, the kind that have never seen a trail. A canvas jacket over expensive sweater. Her hair pulled back. She had, I noticed, a flashlight in her hand, and I could see in the back of the SUV the shape of bags and boxes and what looked like a long-handled tool of some kind. Bolt cutters, I thought. Or a crowbar. She walked up to the gate. She saw me. Her face went through several expressions in a very short amount of time, ending on something I would describe as a kind of frozen smile. Oh, she said. What a surprise. Evening, daughter, I said. I had always called her that. It had always made her uncomfortable, which was, I will admit, why I'd kept doing it. What are you doing up here? It's my property. I know that. I just mean it this hour. I might ask you the same thing. She glanced at the deputy. Her smile got tighter. My husband and I have been thinking of buying a place up here. A weekend place. I thought I'd come look at the area, get a feel for it. At midnight. I drove later than I meant to. With your brother. He came along for company. The brother had not gotten out of the SUV. I noticed this. So did the deputy. Sir, the deputy said, leaning down a little to look through the windshield. Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle, please? The brother got out. He was a heavy-set man, maybe 35, with the kind of expression people wear when they have been talked into something by a sister that they are a little afraid of. He stood by the front of the SUV, and he didn't say anything. Daughter, I said, why don't you tell the deputy what's in the back of the truck? Just camping gear. Bolt cutters? She didn't answer. Crowbar? She didn't answer. Shovel? She didn't answer. The deputy walked around to the back of the SUV. The brother, to his credit, opened the hatch without being asked. The deputy looked inside for a long moment. Then he straightened up and he said, very mildly, Ma'am, that is a lot of camping gear. We were going to do some renovations on the property. The one we're thinking of buying. Which property is that? It's not finalized. Ma'am, may I see your driver's license? She gave it to him. He copied down the information. He copied the brother's information too. He took photographs of the inside of the SUV with his phone. He made a phone call to somebody, very quietly, and he wrote down what they told him. Then he came back to where I was standing and he said, "Sir, would you like to press charges for attempted trespass and conspiracy to commit burglary?" I looked at my daughter-in-law. She was, finally, starting to understand. I could see it happening in her face, the way you can see clouds change color before a storm. "Not tonight," I said. The deputy looked surprised. So did Eddie. So did my daughter-in-law, although for a different reason. "I'm not going to press charges tonight," I said. "I'm going to do something different. Daughter, come here." She walked up to the gate. The deputy stayed where he was. Eddie stayed where he was. The brother stayed where he was. I said to her quietly, so only she could hear, "There's nothing here that you want." No. Listen to me. There's nothing here that you want. There's no money. There's no jewelry. There's no investment portfolio. There's no gold buried in the basement. The thing my son's mother left him is already in a trust that you cannot touch. The house you live in is in a trust that you cannot touch. The house you live in is in a trust that you cannot touch. The accounts you think are joint are not joint. The car you drive is leased through a corporate entity that owns nothing else, and if my son stops making the payments, which I am going to encourage him to do, starting tomorrow, it will be repossessed within 60 days. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Her face was very white. You signed a prenuptial agreement 6.5 years ago. You told my son you didn't read it. You did read it. I have a video of you reading it. My wife arranged that too. That's illegal. It was filmed in my house, by me, with full disclosure to your attorney at the time, who, you may remember, you fired 2 weeks after the wedding. We have his receipt of the file. The agreement is airtight. My wife was a very thorough woman. She said nothing. Her mouth was open slightly. What you came here for tonight does not exist. What does exist is a box of letters from a dead Korean War veteran to his wife. A box of diaries from a woman you never met. A wedding ring that belonged to my late wife, which my son will receive when I die, not before. Some photographs. Some other items that have personal meaning to me and to no one else in the world. That is what you were going to break in here to steal tonight. Letters from a man who has been dead for 36 years. She started to cry. I want to say something here. I am not a man who enjoys watching a woman cry, even a woman like her. I took no pleasure in it. I felt, mostly, very tired. I'm not going to press charges tonight, I said. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to call my son in the morning. I'm going to tell him exactly what happened here. I'm going to play him the audio recording from the dashboard camera in my truck, which has been recording this entire conversation. I'm going to send him the photograph the deputy just took of the bolt cutters in your trunk. And then I'm going to let him decide what he wants to do. He won't believe you. Yes, he will. He loves me. Yes, he does. And he loved his mother more. And she saw you coming 6 years ago. And he knows that, in a place inside himself, he's been refusing to look at. Tonight, he's going to look at it. She was crying harder now. The smile was completely gone. What was left was a face I had not seen on her before, which was, I think, the actual face under all the others. It was younger than I expected, and tireder. Get in your car, I said. Drive home. Don't go to my son's house tonight. Stay with your brother. Stay with your mother. Stay anywhere but there. He's going to need a few days. She got in the car. The brother got in the car. They drove away. The deputy looked at me. He said, "You sure you don't want to file something?" "I'm sure." "All right then." He drove away too. Eddie offered me his couch, and I took him up on it because I was suddenly so tired I could not have driven another mile. I called my son from Eddie's kitchen at 2 in the morning. I told him everything. He was very quiet on the phone. At the end of it, he said, "Dad, can I come up there in the morning? I want to see the cabin." "Yes, son, come up." He came up the next morning. He had not slept. He looked older than I had ever seen him look. We walked up the road from the gate together, and I unlocked the cabin, and we went inside, and I rolled back the rug in the bedroom, and I lifted the floorboards, and I showed him the box. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he opened it slowly. He looked at his grandfather's letters. He looked at his grandmother's diaries. He picked up his mother's wedding ring, and he held it in his palm for a long time, and his shoulders shook, and he did not make a sound. After a while, he said, "This is what she came for." Yes. She would have thrown all of this away. Yes. She wouldn't have even understood what it was. No, son, she wouldn't have. He sat with the ring for a long time. Then he closed the box, very gently, and he said, "I'm going to file on Monday." "All right. I don't want her in the house when I get back. Eddie can drive you home today. He'll wait while you change the locks. I've got a guy. He can be there by 5. Thank you, Dad." We drove back down to the gate together. Before we got in our separate trucks, my son stopped and he turned to me and he said, "What else did Mom set up? That you haven't told me about." I thought about it. I thought about my wife on her last good day, sitting in the sunroom with her lawyer, signing pages. "There's a letter," I said. "She left a letter for you. I was supposed to give it to you when this happened. If this happened, she wasn't sure it would." "Where is it?" "In my safe at home." "Can I have it tonight?" "Yes, son." He gave me a look I will remember until the day I die. It was the look of a man who has just understood, all at once, that he has been loved his entire life by people he did not always know how to see clearly, and that it is not too late to love them back. The divorce went through in about 14 months, which is fast for a contested case. The prenup held, exactly the way my wife's lawyer had said it would. My daughter-in-law walked away with her own premarital assets, which were not much, and the German SUV, which was repossessed 3 weeks after the filing because my son did stop making the payments the morning after he came back from the cabin. He sold the big house. He moved into a smaller place, an old craftsman bungalow about 20 minutes from where I live, and he furnished it with things you can sit on. He started seeing somebody about a year and a half later, a woman who teaches 3rd grade and who, the first time I met her, brought me a jar of homemade strawberry jam and asked me about my service the way people ask when they actually want to hear the answer. They got married last spring in my backyard in front of 40 people with a single fiddle player and a potluck dinner. He wore his grandfather's suit, which I had kept all these years for him. The cabin is still standing. I go up there every fall, alone, for a week. I read my mother's diaries by the wood stove, one a year, slowly. I am on the 4th one. They are not what I expected. She was a sharper woman than I knew. The box is still under the floorboards. I added one thing to it last year after the wedding. It's a photograph of my son, on the porch of the cabin with his new wife, taken the weekend they came up to visit me. She's holding a fishing rod. He's laughing. His mother would have liked her. I told him so. He said he knew. He said he could feel it. There are people in this world who will look at a man like me, old truck, old house, worn jacket, quiet life, and decide there must be something hidden somewhere, some treasure being kept from them, some secret hoard they have a right to. They will spend years scheming for it. They will drive through the night with bolt cutters to find it. And when they get there, when they pry up the floorboards and tear open the box, they will find a stack of old letters, a child's lock of hair, a photograph of strangers, and they will not understand what they are looking at, because the treasure was never the money. It was never going to be the money. The treasure was the 36 years of letters from a man to the woman he loved across an ocean. It was the diaries of a woman who never thought anyone would read them. It was a ring on the finger of a woman who, dying, used the last clear months of her life to protect her son from a stranger she could see coming through the dark. That is what was under my floorboards. That is what I never told my son, and that is what his mother, who I miss every day, made sure he would understand in the end, when the time came. She knew. She always knew. That was her treasure too, I think. Knowing. I think a lot these days about the chain of small choices that brought us all to that gate at midnight. My daughter-in-law didn't wake up one morning and decide to drive 4 hours through the dark with bolt cutters in her trunk. She got there one decision at a time, the way most people get most places. She decided, somewhere along the line, that what other people had built was a thing she was owed. She decided that love was a kind of leverage. She decided that my son's quiet decency was a weakness she could work around. Every one of those decisions seemed small and reasonable to her at the time, I imagine, but put end to end, they walked her right to a cabin in the Maine woods, where there was nothing waiting for her, except a deputy with a flashlight and an old man who had been told, 6 years before, that this was coming. That is the part I want my grandchildren to understand someday, if I am lucky enough to have any. Character is not a thing you decide to have on the day you need it. It is a thing you build, one quiet choice at a time, in the years when nobody is watching. My wife saw clearly because she had spent 43 years practicing seeing clearly. My son survived because his mother, in the months when she was already dying, used what strength she had left to protect him in ways he wouldn't understand for years. And I was able to act that night, calmly, without rage, because I had been given time to prepare, and because I had decided long before that I would not meet ugliness with ugliness, if I could meet it with patience instead. There is a kind of strength that has nothing to do with raising your voice. Alice taught me that when we were boys, watching our father handle hard men at the mill without ever once cursing at them. Marlene reminded me of it every day she was alive. Eddie showed it to me again that night at the gate, doing exactly what was needed and no more. Strength is not the loud thing. It's the still thing. It's the thing that sits and waits and does not flinch. If you are watching this and you have something worth protecting, a family, a memory, a piece of land your father built with his hands, I want to tell you something simple. Do not assume the people you love will see what you see. Write it down. Set it up. Talk to a lawyer. Tell the truth, even the hard truths, to the people who need to hear them while you still can. My wife did, and her foresight outlived her by years. That is the real inheritance. Not the money, not the cabin, not the box under the floor. The inheritance is the act of having loved your people clearly enough, in time, to leave them ready for the world that is coming. That is what I learned. That is what she taught me. And that, in the end, is what I have left to pass on.